this is not a lecture about computer programming. It's about media theory, and I believe that The Prisoner is one of the most intelligent TV shows that has ever been made. And I'm glad that there are so many reenactments here and stuff like that, but I would like to see it move into a different direction, or at least partly, because I also published a book on Star Trek, and I've been to a lot of Star Trek conventions, and I think that Star Trek is right on the border between being a set of very interesting ideas about society and human existence and technology and philosophy. On the other hand, it's become a culture industry. Now, and what does that mean? It means the fans, and there are tens of millions of Star Trek fans, are obsessed with what I call the hyper-real details of the show. So they want to dress like Star Trek characters, and they've, people who are real fans, they know every line of every episode ever made. So, no, I'm not going to say that it's wrong to be interested to memorize every line that was ever said in The Prisoner, and I enjoyed tremendously this reenactments today. But I think that we should take ourselves much more seriously, because this was a TV show that has the quality of literature, like they studied novels, in previous generation in universities, in literature departments. I think that a lot of television shows like Star Trek and The Prisoner and many others have the quality of literature. And The Prisoner, to me, is deeply connected with the most important media theory of our time. If we begin with George Orwell's 1984 and this depictions of dystopian and totalitarian societies, which, as we know, a lot of people thought that Orwell was writing about the Soviet Union, but he was actually writing about the Western capitalist societies just as much as he was writing about the communist totalitarian. And I'm glad to be in, I'm in Wales, I'm not in England, but Orwell is my favorite British writer, so I'm happy to mention him. Now, I think that Patrick McGowan in the 60s was very connected with Marshall McLuhan. So this connection between McGowan and McLuhan. And Marshall McLuhan was Canadian. He was the founder of worldwide media theory. And some of the most basic things about The Prisoner connect very directly to McLuhan, because he used the term the global village. The global village. He said he was seeing the rise of electronic media like television. He predicted something like the internet would happen, and he said the world is more and more like a global village, and we're all prisoners in this global village. Whatever happens when a Hollywood actress is arrested for drunk driving, the rest of the world knows about it within an hour, and things happen in this global media communication society. It's just like a village. And then I was always struck by, in the opening sequence, the dialogue between number 6 and number 2, when he says, we want information, information, information. And now we are living in an information society. That's what sociology talks about. And I think The Prisoner is incredibly relevant today for understanding what's going on, that we're being asked by corporations and the government and by other people to provide information to them. And you are not, you don't have a name, you have a number. We more and more are identified by our numbers, the number that the Social Security system gives us, the bank account numbers. You're identified as a number, and more things going on in our daily lives is ruled by automatic processes, by computer programs in which no human intervention is possible. And then, of course, the surveillance society. We're living in a society of surveillance, which means we're being closely observed, and that's a basic theme in The Prisoner, being closely observed, the closed circuit TV, and it's gone beyond Orwell's model, the model of surveillance of citizens by a totalitarian government that Orwell presented in his novel 1984. We're now way beyond that, and we have more advanced kinds of surveillance like self-surveillance, mutual surveillance. That's what I think something like Facebook is. Facebook is a sort of self-surveillance. An example, I was on the bus coming here from Manchester, and sitting behind me, I got in conversation with a young Italian man, and in Italy there's no work for young people, and they're all going all around the world trying to find work. And he told me the story that he went to Canada with a tourist visa, but then he wrote on Facebook to his Facebook friends, sort of bragging about it, like in an adventurous way, I'm going to Canada to look for work. And then he arrived in the airport in Toronto, and when he went through the immigration, the passport control, they do a search on his name, and part of the search includes Facebook. And so they actually, what he had told his friends on Facebook, they knew that in his mind, he was intending to look for work in Canada. And they asked him, what are you here for? He said, I just want to see it. I'm here as a tourist. He was lying. And so they knew, and then they kept him one night in a detention center and put him on the plane back to Italy the next day. So that was his fate of his trip to Canada. It was because of Facebook, which is a kind of self-surveillance, where we are voluntarily telling the rest of society all the information about ourselves. I will sort of force feed you a little bit of academic knowledge about media theory. If you don't like it, you're free. You're free to stand up and walk out of the room. You're free to throw, you can throw a pie in my face if you want. I'm expecting one at the end. So I will mention that The Prisoner is very important, and I use it to teach social theory. What used to be called social theory, which was an important academic field, now, or political and social theory, now it's divided up into things like media theory, cultural theory, software theory. There's I think the four most important media theorists of our time that are most prominently studied in media studies at universities. And The Prisoner, the text of The Prisoner, this is a word that we like to say in academia, talking about television and films, we call it text, just like in the old days a novel was a text. But the Prisoner connects very, very deeply to all four of the most important media theorists. Marshall McLuhan, I already mentioned. The next one is Michel Foucault. Has anyone here heard of Michel Foucault? Yes. Great. Okay, Michel Foucault, who is Chinese. No, he's French. Michel Foucault did some really dumb things in his life. Like he supported the fundamentalist Muslim revolution in Iran in 1980. It's really kind of dumb. But anyway, Michel Foucault wrote a great book that's called Discipline and Punish. Anyone read that? Discipline and Punish, which is the history of prisons and the architecture of prisons, the architecture of power. And he said, well, this is again England, Jeremy Bentham in the mid-19th century developed something called the panopticon, the idea of the panopticon, which is very interesting architecture of surveillance and power that was used in prisons starting in the mid-19th century based on Jeremy Bentham's idea. And that was that there would be like a central guard tower, a central surveillance tower from which all the... I'm dead.
I'm dead.
I'm dead. I knew there was, in the parade, there was a guy playing Lee Harvey Oswald. There was a guy with a gun. And I thought, yes, every once in a while, the number 2 gets assassinated, or John F. Kennedy. So, the guard in the guard tower can observe all the prisoners in their individual cells in a circular arrangement around the tower. And then eventually each prisoner in his or her cell behaves passively, docilely, in the right way because he knows that he's being watched. So that it goes from the act of watching, the act of being observed and controlled, to the self-surveillance because the prisoner knows, hey, I'm being watched, I better behave. And then Foucault saw this architecture of power operating in all of the social institutions of European and American society, like schools and hospitals and factories and offices and so on. But Foucault is known as the theorist of surveillance. So there's a whole field of study. What are the forms of surveillance that are emerging now in the media society, in the age of new media, new technology, with things like Facebook? Excuse me?
Smart TVs.
Smart TV.
Yeah, they have cameras built in, they're watching you now.
Yeah. They are.
Yeah.
Next slide. Another very important media theorist is another French one named Jean Baudrillard. And Baudrillard's key idea was simulation, simulacra, and hyperreality. Baudrillard is very connected with the prisoner. Baudrillard is so important that the film The Matrix showed, Baudrillard's most important book is called Simulation and Simulacra. And about 5 minutes into the film The Matrix, we see Keanu Reeves takes down from a bookshelf in his apartment a copy of Baudrillard's Simulation and Simulacra, and the 2 filmmakers, the Wachowski brothers who made The Matrix, they said they were inspired making the film by Baudrillard's idea. The idea of The Matrix is we live in a virtual reality, right? All of reality that we believe is a physical reality, phenomenological reality around us. It's actually generated by a 3-dimensional graphics-intensive computer program. It's a 3D world. And I think it's possible to interpret The Prisoner in that way too. Most of you probably hate the 2009 remake, but it does kind of present that idea is an additional dimension of the surveillance, that it is a sort of a virtual reality living inside a cartoon. Then we have the fourth great media theorist of today, whose name is Willem Flusser, and there's a lot in The Prisoner that relates to Willem Flusser. I'll mention a little bit of that later. Okay, I'll read. So I'm going to also partly read from. I'm writing a book on The Prisoner, and I'll read from it. And I have two co-authors on this project. They're both Canadian, and I want to mention them and thank them. One is Nicole Maggio, who wrote her master's thesis on The Prisoner, and Nolan Bassinet, who lives in Montreal, and Nicole lives in Nova Scotia. So, what is the physical location of the village? McGowan fuels the allegory by keeping both the fictional location and the real production location of the village ambiguous. In the chimes of Big Ben, we find out from Nadia that the village is in Lithuania on the Baltic, 30 miles from the Polish border. However, this seems to be untrue. In Many Happy Returns, the location of the village is calculated through very complex, indirect reasoning related to information about number 6's long journey on a raft by a naval commander and RAF group captain to be off the coast of Morocco, southwest of Portugal and Spain. We can assume this location in southwest Portugal and Spain to be the correct fictional location as the prisoner sees the village with his own eyes in this geographical area when traveling with a pilot in a military jet. It is not until the closing credits of Fallout that we are made aware that The Prisoner was filmed on location in Portmeirion, North Wales. I think The Prisoner also inspired many science fiction films. People don't realize that. And to me, a very important example is The Truman Show. I think The Truman Show takes a lot of ideas from The Prisoner. The Truman Show it's a reality TV. This was even before a lot of the reality TV shows like Big Brother. So this Truman, played by Jim Carrey, he's being watched 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, by a television viewing public, and this entire town has been set up as a TV studio, and only he doesn't know it, right? All the other people in the town are actors who go home at night, and they are part of his life, but only in this staged TV show. So I think that takes a lot from The Prisoner. And being here now, it's a great experience for me. It's like a sort of a pilgrimage, going to Mecca for me to come to Portmeirion, because I've loved The Prisoner all my life. And walking around here, I have this feeling of like nothing really makes sense in terms of classical ideas of what's real and what's fake, what's here and what's there. Like, sort of, this whole town, it was built by that architect, I can't seem to remember his name, in the 20s. So it existed prior to the filming of The Prisoner, but the town, in a sense, becomes what it is through the filming of a TV show, not in a studio. It's like The Truman Show, but then now it's become a metaphor for the entire information society of universal connectedness by everyone into the internet and all these other media networks. So